I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching 25 years of hard work come to an end in front of my coworkers. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Bright Hollow Labs' downtown Phoenix office, casting long shadows across the polished table where my ideas were placed. Kenneth said with a smug laugh, "Nobody wants Grandma's designs anymore." His voice reverberated through the glass-walled conference room. My 56-year-old career, which has been designing sustainable architecture for more than 20 years, was being dissected like a failed blueprint. I have dedicated my life to this firm, creating innovative green buildings that balanced environmental responsibility with functionality, winning awards, mentoring young architects, and helping to establish Bright Hollow Labs as a leader in sustainable design. But today none of that seemed to matter. The other partners nodded in agreement, their faces displaying a mixture of fake sympathy and relief that they weren't in my position. I could see how they had already made up their minds before I'd even walked into the room. "Your work feels too traditional and rooted in the past." Kenneth paused, trying to find the right words while adjusting his pricey watch. "The market wants sleek, modern designs that speak to younger demographics." Kenneth continued to slide a folder across the table toward me, saying, "You'll be moving off the innovation team to focus on more modern approaches to sustainable design. You'll be reassigned to our restoration division, working on historical preservation projects." The irony that they were casting me in the role of fixing old things didn't escape my notice. I thought about all the late nights I'd spent perfecting designs, all the client meetings where I'd fought for sustainable materials when they were expensive and unpopular, and all the young architects I'd trained who were now sitting quietly around this table. "I understand," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. But I also dismissed the very experience that had taught me how to create lasting, beautiful structures. As I gathered my belongings and made my way to the door, I noticed that my most recent project sketches were still pinned to the presentation board, designs for an inventive, eco-friendly housing complex that integrated solar technology and natural ventilation systems. Little did Kenneth know that those out-of-date concepts were going to expire on Monday. "Harrison will take over your current projects, and will make sure the clients are aware of the change." I was about to prove him completely wrong, so I tried to process what had happened as I walked back to my office. The hallways of Bright Hollow Labs felt different now, less like home and more like a place where I was just tolerated. I had worked here for so long that I could walk through them with my eyes closed. But now everything seemed strange. I joined the firm right out of graduate school, back when sustainable architecture was less of a niche specialty than an industry standard. My mentor, Patricia Holloway, started the business with the goal of designing structures that blended in with their surroundings. She sold her shares to the current partnership 5 years ago, and with her went the spirit of the business I had helped create, Kenneth Morrison, who has been moving up the corporate ladder ever since. He prioritized flamboyant architectural designs that looked good. His idea of innovation was installing smart home technology in otherwise conventional buildings and calling them revolutionary. I thought about my daughter Claire, who lived in Seattle with her 2 kids. She would frequently ask me why I stayed at a firm that seemed to undervalue my contributions, saying, "Mom, you could start your own practice," during our weekly video calls, experience and the reputation. However, Bright Hollow Labs had been my professional identity for so long that I couldn't imagine working anywhere else. As I arrived at my office, I saw pictures of buildings I had designed over the years, including the Tempe Elementary School that had cut its energy use and the Tucson Community Center that had won a state sustainability award by 60%, and the Mesa Affordable Housing Project, which had become a model for other cities. Each project was more than just a building. It was a piece of my professional story. 3 months ago, my computer rang with an email notification from the Phoenix Green Housing Initiative, which was highly important. I had worked on it on the weekends and in my home studio, submitting my independent design proposal. The city had also announced a competition for sustainable. My heart raced when I realized that even though Kenneth was pushing me to leave, my own work might be opening a whole new door. I quickly responded, confirming my availability, and then sat back in my chair with the first genuine smile I'd felt all day. Affordable housing concepts, and I decided to enter under my own name rather than through the firm. The email was brief but promising, and they wanted to schedule a presentation meeting for the following. The weekend went by in a blur of conflicting feelings, with me alternating between rage at Kenneth's contemptuous behavior and enthusiasm for the presentation with the city on Saturday morning. I spread out my competition designs on my dining room table, going over each detail with new eyes. My idea was modular sustainable housing units that could be modified to fit various family sizes and lot configurations. The aesthetic was clean and modern but rooted in practical functionality, what Kenneth would likely refer to as grandma's designs, but I knew it was just good architecture. On Sunday afternoon, Claire called for our weekly. "You sound different, Mom," she said after I informed her that I had been relieved of my position on the innovation. "I was expecting you to be more upset." I confessed that I was upset as I walked around my home office, where I had spent many hours working on personal projects, but I was also feeling liberated for the first time in. "Tell me about this city project," she said, and I could tell she was genuinely interested. I described my housing design concept and how it could provide a. As I spoke, I realized how passionate I still felt about my work, despite the firm's attempt to make me feel. "This sounds amazing. When is your presentation on Tuesday?" "I've been working on the proposal all weekend, and I stopped to look at the drawings scattered across my desk. The irony is that this design incorporates everything the young architect Harrison, who would be taking over my projects, sent me an email on Monday morning, asking to set up a meeting to discuss the transition. I agreed, but I thought it was ironic that someone half my age and with a fraction of my experience was deemed more innovative just because he preferred steel and glass over natural materials. The meeting was professional, but "I've reviewed your current projects," Harrison said, scattering files across the conference table. "Your work is really impressive. I hope I can maintain the same level of quality you will." Harrison was obviously uncomfortable with the situation, but I didn't want to make it worse for him. He was talented but inexperienced, and none of this was his fault. I reassured him, though, that sustainable design isn't about following trends. It's about creating. These buildings will be finished by someone else, but they represented my past Tuesday's presentation, which would determine my future. On Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office early to finish clearing out my workspace from the innovation team area. The building felt quieter than usual. These buildings will serve people well for decades. As I handed over my project files, I felt a strange sense of closure. With the majority of employees coming by 8 a.m., Kenneth passed by my old desk as I was packing the last of my personal belongings. "How is the transition going, Eliza?" He asked in a tone that suggested he was asking out of obligation rather than genuine concern. I replied without looking up from the box I was filling, preferring the quiet hours before the day's chaos began. I finally looked up at him, this man who had spent the last 5 years methodically undermining everything Patricia Holloway had built. "I understand Kenneth completely. Sometimes change is exactly what's needed." Good, he said, pausing. "But I hope you understand that this decision wasn't personal. It's just business. The firm needs to stay competitive." At 1 p.m., I left the office for my presentation, telling my assistant that I had a dentist appointment at Phoenix City Hall, which was a 15-minute drive away. He didn't realize that I would be presenting to the Phoenix Green Housing Initiative committee in 3 hours, potentially starting a new chapter in my career that would make his definition of competitive look incredibly limited. The committee meeting room was smaller than I had anticipated, with 5 members seated around a rectangular table. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the city's director of sustainable development, led the introductions. The other members included a city planner, a housing advocate, an environmental engineer, and a Bright Hollow Labs representative. I used the time to go over my talking points one last time, and my hands were steadier than I had expected, apparently from years of client presentations. For the next half hour, I presented my design with a passion I hadn't felt in years. I described how the modular units could be manufactured off-site to reduce construction waste. Community Representative Ms. Freeman Dr. Rodriguez started by saying, "We've reviewed your preliminary submission, and we're quite impressed. Your modular approach to sustainable housing addresses several key challenges we're facing in Phoenix. The beauty of this system," I said, pointing to my technical drawings, "is its adaptability. While a young couple might start with a 1-bedroom, unit and add modules as their family grows. Empty nesters could downsize by removing sections, which could then be used for other purposes. The passive solar design would minimize energy costs for residents, and the integrated community gardens would provide both food security and social connection. Families, the environmental engineer leaned forward and asked, "What about maintenance? Costs?" These systems look complex, but they're designed for simplicity. I responded that the rainwater and solar panels use proven technology with few moving parts, and the construction materials are chosen for their durability and low maintenance, so that residents would save a significant amount of money on utility bills over a 20-year period. The questions went on for another 20 minutes each, allowing me to. As the session came to an end, Dr. Rodriguez stated, "We have 3 more presentations this week, but I can tell you that your proposal addresses our requirements exceptionally well. We'll be making our final decision by Friday and announcing the winner next Monday." These weren't just pretty drawings. These were a comprehensive solution to urban housing challenges, Ms. Freeman said. As I drove back to Bright Hollow Labs, I felt a mixture of hope, and the rest of the week passed at a torturous pace as I threw myself into my new role in the restoration department, reviewing historical preservation guidelines and studying architectural drawings from the 1920s and 1930s. The irony wasn't lost on me when Kenneth dismissed my work as outdated. I was anxious about whether or not I won the competition, but I reminded myself that my designs weren't dated. They were timeless, practical, and innovative in ways that mattered beyond aesthetic trends. Officially in charge of maintaining buildings that were constructed almost a century ago. On Thursday afternoon, Harrison, an unexpected visitor, knocked on my new office door. He looked unsure and said, "Eliza, do you have a minute?" I told him to sit down because I was having some problems with the Scottsdale project, which had been my baby, a mixed-use development that combined the client, Harrison, is requesting changes to the ventilation system. They want to add more mechanical cooling, but I'm not sure how that will affect your sustainability calculations. I took out my original project notes, which show that the natural ventilation system was intended to work with the building's HVAC system. The residential units, office spaces, and retail space are all arranged around a central courtyard with native desert landscaping. As we worked, I became aware of how much institutional knowledge was leaving the building. Harrison was intelligent and willing to learn, but he lacked the experience to comprehend how altering one component of a sustainable design could impact the entire system. Orientation and the thermal mass of the adobe walls if you add conventional air conditioning. You'll need to recalculate the energy load for the entire building. Demotion, Harrison mentioned after we were done. I've been looking at your other projects, and your approach to sustainable design is really sophisticated. I don't understand why he left the innovation team, as it was obviously awkward to criticize the partners. I finished for him because sometimes experience is seen as a liability rather than an asset. Friday morning, I received an email that made my heart skip a beat. Dr. Rodriguez wanted to set up a follow-up call for the call lasted only 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes were the most crucial of my professional life, Miss Freeman. I'm happy to notify you that the committee has chosen your modular sustainable housing design as the winner of our competition. The subject line read, Phoenix Green Housing Initiative Next Steps. I tried not to read too much into the phrasing, but next steps sounded promising. I sat in stunned silence for a moment before answering. Thank you. I'm honored and excited to move forward. The formal announcement will be made Monday morning at 10:04 a.m. Dr. Rodriguez will be holding a press conference at City Hall, and we'd like you to be present to answer questions. The proposal received the highest score in every category we evaluated: innovation, sustainability, cost-effectiveness, and community impact. After the call ended, I sat in my office considering what had happened. In just 1 week, I had gone from being written off as irrelevant to winning the biggest housing competition in Phoenix's history, and my outdated aesthetic had just been chosen to house thousands of Phoenix residents in cutting-edge sustainable homes. This is a significant initiative for Phoenix, and we plan to build the first phase of 200 units within 18 months. Looking at my calendar, I saw that Monday's press conference would take place during the weekly staff meeting at Bright Hollow Labs. I wondered if anyone would be watching the local news Monday morning when it arrived with unusual news. I considered calling Claire right away, but decided to wait until after the public announcement. There was something satisfying about keeping this victory private for a few more days, especially while Kenneth continued to restructure the innovation team around more contemporary approaches. The weight of the situation was beginning to weigh in as I arrived at City Hall 30 minutes early, wanting time to gather myself before facing the cameras. Warmth for October in Phoenix. I had spent the weekend getting ready for the press conference, going over my design details and anticipating questions from reporters. This wasn't just a professional victory. It was validation of everything I'd spent my career working toward. Dr. Rodriguez and Mayor Patricia met me in her office. Before we start, I want to let you know how impressed we were with your presentation. Miss Freeman. Thompson and a few other city officials said, "This housing initiative represents the future of sustainable urban development, and your design will serve as a model for other cities across the Southwest." The press conference, which included reporters from local newspapers and television stations, as well as representatives from We're proud to announce the winner of Phoenix's Green Housing Initiative today. With architectural publications in attendance, I reflected on all the late nights I'd spent working on this design in my home studio, never realizing it would lead to this moment. Mayor Thompson began. After reviewing proposals from firms across the region, we've selected an innovative modular design that will provide affordable, sustainable housing while establishing thriving neighborhoods for our citizens. She turned to me, and I took the stage to speak to the crowd. This design is the result of 25 years of learning how to build structures that benefit people and the environment. I started by designing homes that will use 60% less energy than traditional housing, while giving residents access to community, spaces, gardens, and the freedom to modify their living arrangements as their needs change. The reporters' questions were, with each response, I felt more confident. For example, a reporter from Channel 12 asked, "I understand you're an architect with Bright Hollow Labs. How does your firm feel about this selection?" A journalist from the Arizona Republic inquired about construction timelines, while a representative from Architectural Digest wanted to know how the design addressed Phoenix's unique climate challenges. I took a moment to consider what to say. As the press conference came to an end, I saw a number of familiar faces in the crowd. Word had apparently spread quickly through Phoenix's architectural community, and I saw former clients, co-workers, from other firms, and even a few current Bright Hollow Labs employees who had clearly left work to attend. Carefully, this was an independent submission. I developed this design on my own time, using my personal experience and vision for sustainable housing. The drive back to Bright Hollow Labs felt surreal after receiving a text from Claire's mother that read, "I just saw the news online. I'm so proud of you." I had just been named the winner of the city's most important housing competition, but I still had to go back to my desk in the restoration department and act like it was just another Monday. As I walked through the office lobby, I could feel eyes following me. I arrived at my office without running into Kenneth, but I knew that conversation was inevitable because my phone was already ringing with reporters requesting follow-up interviews, and my email inbox was overflowing with congratulations from colleagues throughout the industry. By noon, it was evident that my date had dated. I received a knowing smile and a thumbs up from the receptionist at the firm, Janet. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't done yet. At 1 p.m., Kenneth showed up in my office doorway, his expression a careful mask of professionalism that couldn't conceal his frustration. "Eliza, congratulations on your competition win," he said, entering and shutting the door behind him. "That's quite an accomplishment, thank you," I replied, not looking up from the historical preservation documents I was looking over. "I'm happy the city liked the design, but I'm curious as to how exactly you came up with this idea." "I don't remember seeing any modular housing concepts in your most recent project portfolio." I put down my pen and looked him in the eye. "I worked on it in my spare time using my home studio. It took roughly 6 months, mostly on the weekends and evenings." Kenneth's jaw tensed a little. "I see," he said. "And you didn't think to discuss this with the firm. After all, Bright Hollow Labs has been your professional home for 25 years. The competition guidelines were clear that submissions could come from individual architects or firms." I calmly said, "I chose to submit as an individual, but surely you understand the optics here. You're a Bright Hollow Labs employee winning a major city. The competition was announced 4 months ago, the submission deadline was 3 months ago, and the judging process has been going on for weeks. All of this happened just days after he stood up, finally cracking the partners, and I need to talk about how to handle this situation, because the press is already calling for it. The contract was restructured within the firm just days ago, and it could seem that we don't recognize our own talent." I almost laughed at his audacity. Statements regarding our involvement in the project. To save you the trouble, I mentioned that I would be personally responding to all media inquiries. By Tuesday morning, the story had gathered more traction than anyone had anticipated. The Phoenix Business Journal published a front-page feature titled, "Local Architects' Independent Design Wins City Housing Competition," along with a sidebar article that more thoroughly examined the growing trend of sustainable architecture in the Southwest. The story was picked up by the most prestigious publication in the industry, Architectural Review, whose online article, Innovation from Experience, How 25 Years of Practice Led to Award-Winning Design, featured interviews with sustainable design, experts praising the approach, and a detailed analysis of my modular housing concept. On Tuesday afternoon, Kenneth called an emergency partners meeting, which I found out about from Harrison, who had been asked to gather all the materials. John specifically mentioned looking through your project documentation for any connection to the winning design, which made me feel sorry for them, because they were trying to find a way to claim some partial credit for my success, without realizing that this design represented a completely different approach. This was related to my previous projects for the firm, and they want to see everything you worked on for the past 2 years. The partners have been talking about your recent success, and we'd like to suggest a solution that benefits everyone. We're willing to offer you reinstatement to the innovation team as the lead sustainable design architect. However, Wednesday brought the phone call I had been anticipating, and it was Kenneth, whose voice was strained with forced enthusiasm. "Your housing project may be implemented by Bright Hollow Labs." I waited a few seconds before answering. "Thank you for the offer, Kenneth, but I'm happy with my current position. As for the implementation, I'll be working directly with the city's chosen construction partners." His sharp intake of breath was audible over the phone. "Elizabeth, surely you can see the mutual benefit here with the firm's resources. We had built relationships with contractors, and the city had already chosen their preferred partners." I gently interrupted, but the decision was final. On Thursday morning, after 25 years, I turned in my letter of resignation to Bright Hollow Labs, indicating that it was time to launch my own practice. My first significant client would be the Phoenix Housing Project, but since Monday's announcement, the phone has been ringing with architecture firms from all over the nation calling. Kenneth made one last attempt to change my mind when he wanted to talk about partnerships or licensing agreements for my modular design concept. He showed up at my office as I was packing my personal belongings. "This is a mistake, Eliza. You're sacrificing decades of stability for what could be a short-term success." I looked around the office I was leaving behind, then at the man who tried to make me feel outdated, Kenneth. "And you told me nobody Claire flew down from Seattle for the weekend to help me set up my new home office, and as we set up my drafting table by the large window overlooking the desert landscape, she asked about my plans. I told her that I was going to design buildings not just structurally, but also in terms of their value to the communities they serve. It turns out that you were wrong about what people actually want. The Phoenix Green Housing Initiative's first phase began construction 6 months later, and I was invited to the ceremony by Mayor Thompson to witness the foundation being laid for homes that would house families for generations. The design that Kenneth had rejected as antiquated was now being studied by urban planners from all over the world, and as I stood there witnessing my vision come to life, I realized that my journey from fired employee to independent architect taught me that true innovation comes from understanding rather than following trends. Sometimes the sweetest retaliation isn't proving your detractors wrong, but rather proving that you were correct all along. Timeless values and using them to current difficulties.